PhD. Yeah, I'm going to be talking to you today about my PhD research and my journey. I should tell you a little bit about myself first for those small amount of you in the room who don't know me. So I've been a midwife for about 14 years and it's great to come back to Manchester because Manchester's where I did my training, and certainly Stretford and Old Trafford is where I did all of my community placement, so it was great to come back here. I moved from Manchester to Liverpool, worked at Liverpool Women's for a while, and I'm now, as I say, a lecturer and programme lead for midwifery at John Moores. I started my PhD journey 18 months ago now. It feels a lot longer than that, and it's a part-time PhD, so I'm not even halfway through just yet. So I'm going to tell you a bit about where I'm up to now. I'm going to talk about what negation is. You're probably thinking, what is it? I don't really know what that means. So I'm going to talk a bit about the definition, what that means. And I'm going to start by telling you how I first got interested in this as a subject. So, before I talk about what negation is, and the title probably should give a clue, it is about secrets, it is about hiding things, concealing things, and it is also about the unknown as well. So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be talking about. Throughout history, women have negated their pregnancies, their labours, their births, and the postnatal period as well. It goes back to biblical times. There are historical documents which talk about hidden pregnancies, about fables and stories about women who didn't know they were pregnant till they were in labour. So there are lots of kind of anecdotal informations and stories that we can see. There are some accounts from historical records, so if you look at some parish records, library collections, and other types of historical research, they also mention the secrecy, the hidden pregnancies, the denial. And more recently as well, the media portrayal links the negation, so the secrecy and so on, very strongly with things like baby abandonment. So we all know those stories that you see in the media, which are portrayed as woman gives birth in toilet, baby found the next day, baby found abandoned. There are some countries where they have baby hatches to try and mitigate the issue. And also there are some countries which have anonymous birth-in law. So there's lots and lots of kind of negativity tied up with this as a subject. In terms of why I chose to look at this goes back a long, long time to an interest I had when I was a student midwife. So this is over 14 years ago. And I write a researcher diary alongside my PhD. It helps me to reflect on my own experience and my own position as a researcher within my research, which is important because I'm doing narrative research, so my position in this is important. And this is an excerpt from my researcher diary, and it takes me back to a lady that I looked after actually when I was a student midwife, and the unit that I was based at then. This lady turned up in labour. She'd concealed the whole pregnancy, hadn't told anyone about the pregnancy, hadn't told her partner, hadn't told her family. She had other children, they were completely unaware. No one knew that this lady was pregnant. So she turned up at our unit in labour, not having told anyone, and following the birth, it was very quick birth, completely straightforward. She was very, as I said, distant, very emotionally detached. She didn't want to pick the baby up, she didn't want to look at the baby, she didn't want to hold the baby, and for me, that was my first real encounter with someone who had concealed completely the whole pregnancy. I'd never come across it before. And also for someone to be so detached from their baby, so frightened, maybe so scared, and I just couldn't understand why somebody would want to do that. And I think since that experience as a student, when I moved to the Women's, I worked in a team of specialist midwives who looked after vulnerable women and then looked after more women who had either concealed the pregnancy and sometimes the birth completely, or women who didn't know they were pregnant, or as you'll hear midwives say, said they didn't know they were pregnant. They turn up at A&E with abdo pain, and actually it's not abdo pain, you're in labour. And then people would say, well, how on earth can that be true? How can you not know? So that's where the interest stems from. So in terms of what's missing then, when I first started having this notion about, actually, I'd quite like to do a PhD, which seemed like a good idea at the time, I thought back to this lady and I thought back to that interest, and then I thought back to actually how much research is out there on this. We don't record it as an event, as a phenomena, like we record other things. And when I started to look at this, there was very little, there is still very, very little quality research on negated childbearing as a topic, as an issue. There's virtually no qualitative research. So the research that's out there up to now, most of it's quantitative. Most of it looks at prevalence, which I'm going to discuss in a minute, which is also up for debate. So how common or not is it? And some of the researchers looked at socio-demographic factors as well. And again, that's an interest because there's not an agreement. There's no typical woman that this happens to from what I can see. And also, a lot of the research that's been done to date, not much of that has actually been carried out by midwives. So there's not that midwifery aspect or that angle to the research. The other thing as well, most of the research that's been done to date is completely focused on the pregnancy, on the antenatal period. There's very little research which looks at pregnancy, labour, birth and the postnatal period, which is why I wanted to cover the whole of the childbearing continuum for my PhD. For all those things, the thing that really stood out as being missing was actually the voice of the woman. Had anyone asked these women why they concealed their pregnancy, why they didn't know they were pregnant? Have they had the opportunity to tell their story? So for me, that was the most important thing that I thought was missing, and that's what led me to thinking, we need to do something about this. We need to know more about this, and the reason why we need to know more about it is so we can provide better care for these women. So I said I'd talk a bit about definitions. So there are a few different definitions of negation in the literature. It means different things. So Sadler, who did some work in 2002, the definition that she uses is that they say negation is where a female, through fear, ignorance or denial, does not accept or is unaware of the pregnancy in an appropriate way. That's an okay definition, but I don't like some of the language used, because who are we to say what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate? So I've made up my own definition, which is what I've used to define what I will be covering within my PhD. So for me, the phenomena of maternal negation encompasses pregnancy, labour, birth and the postnatal period, so the whole of the childbearing continuum. It includes conscious concealment and conscious and unconscious denial. So looking at women who know they are pregnant but who choose to hide, conceal, not tell anyone, whichever words you choose, or those women who do not know that they are in labour. So those ladies I was talking about before who turn up with abdo pain, come to A&E, oh, actually, you're in labour and you're going to have a baby. I spoke briefly before about prevalence, and it's really, really interesting because there's some work has been done, for those of you at the back who might not be able to see, there's quite a wide disparity in terms of how common or not this is. And from anecdotal information and from my own clinical research, I think it's more common than we think it is. So the figures to date, so some of these are quite old, so from between 2002 to 2012, different authors have come up with different statistics about how common or not this is. So anything from between 1 in 403 to 1 in 2,500. So that's quite a big margin, really. As I said, I think it's more common than that. So I talk to the midwives, I talk to our student midwives, and they'll say, they know about my study, and they'll say, oh, we had a lady in last week. Oh, we had 3 ladies in last week. Oh, we had a lady who concealed a twin pregnancy. We've had a lady who's concealed 3 deliveries. So I get lots and lots of, anecdotal information. These figures, I don't think, are accurate, like I said, because we don't record it. We don't record it as an event. So, research to date mainly covers these things. We've talked about prevalence, varied socio-demographic profile. So again, a lot of the research to date can't build a picture of what type of woman might be likely to negate her pregnancy. There isn't any one type of social background, social class, any particular age, any other characteristics that we can link with this. And I think one of the reasons for that, it's such an individualistic thing, okay? Women have lots of different things going on in their lives, and it's a very difficult thing to predict, and also because we know so very, very little about it, okay? So it's difficult to predict, and there are a number of influencing factors. There could be any number of reasons why a woman might choose to conceal a pregnancy. They could be very personal reasons, it could be very practical reasons, could be financial reasons, social reasons, religious, cultural reasons. There are lots and lots of things that influence the way women make the decisions that they make in terms of their pregnancy. So I've chosen quite a difficult subject to study because we don't know much about it, and because research to date is, there's kind of no agreement really on background. It's quite interesting. I was at the talk before about the babies removed at birth, and the lady who's at the end of her PhD journey, so it's good to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel, had used a narrative approach as well. And it's quite nice because a narrative approach to research is very rarely used in midwifery, certainly. And it's not something that I had ever considered before I sat down with my supervisory team, and we were talking about approach and how my methodological approach, what approach I was going to be using to look at this subject. And one of my supervisors had done his PhD using narrative research. He's a sociologist, and that's one of the benefits of having a kind of a multidisciplinary supervisory team, is you get that expertise. And he'd said to me, well, you said you might do phenomenology, which might work, but if you use the narrative approach, which is really basically about stories and storytelling and keeping that story intact and whole and thinking about the context, that would be perfect for your subject area. And I went, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I'll do narrative research. And at that point, I knew very, very little about what narrative research actually meant, because I'd never really heard of it before. So I went off and I had a look, and I thought, why didn't I consider this before? It's a very, very fluid and dynamic way of doing research. There are lots of different ways of using a narrative approach. The lady who'd looked at the babies being removed at birth had used photo elicitation as part of her study. You can use poetry, you can use diaries. There are lots and lots of different ways of doing it. It's very, very deeply subjective as a research approach. You could say that was one of the strengths of narrative research. It is also considered one of the challenges of it as well, that it is very subjective. It's considered to be a presentation of the meaning of the experience as told by the participants. So this isn't a search for the truth. It is a search for what that negation means to that woman in particular. So it's very, very, like I said, very individualistic to that particular woman. Okay. The participant takes ownership of their experience, and through narrative inquiry, this is how it's studied by the researcher. Okay. And again, the lady who talked about her study with the babies removed at birth mentioned about the positive effects of that catharsis of telling the story to someone who isn't going to interrupt, who is going to listen, and is going to take that story as it's told. So it isn't changed in any way, it's the story as you want to tell it. So it's the bits that you leave in, it's the bits that you leave out, because those are what are important to you as the woman. Okay, so that's what the narrative researcher looks at. In terms of the key research questions, these are more kind of aims and objectives. I don't have a standard research question. So what I'm going to be doing is exploring the stories of negated childbearing at any stage, so antenatal, labour, birth and postnatal period, so not just concentrating on the antenatal period, from the perspective of the woman affected. To gain an increase in understanding of this as a phenomena, so to add to that body of research from the woman's perspective, which is what's missing at the moment, because there's a lack of understanding and identification of this. And also to try and explore, are there any services and support mechanisms that are offered to these women? Part of my research, I looked at trust guidelines. There are only a couple of trusts which have specific guidelines around concealed pregnancy, and it just does consider pregnancy concealment, so it doesn't look at women who might have pregnancy denial, say. There seems to be a very, very strong relationship with safeguarding, as you might expect, and it seems to be nearly every local safeguarding children's board has got a guideline on concealed pregnancy. So there is a very strong link with safeguarding, but not much around maternity guidelines. So how am I going to encourage women to share their stories? I thought very, very long and hard about the methods that I wanted to use, and as a narrative researcher, the obvious choice seemed to be an interview. And I'll need to speed up now because I'm being waved at. So in-depth, unstructured interviews are what I intend to do, using the one-question method, which is quite a scary method to use. So you still have an interview schedule, but that's your one question with prompts if needed. I aim to recruit 6 women. You might think, well, that's not very many. In terms of qualitative research, there isn't an agreed a kind of minimum number really, but 6 seems to be, in some qualitative researchers, that's kind of ideal number. Running alongside that will be a social media group, and this is going to be a secret Facebook group which will act as a virtual focus group. Okay, and same number of women to be invited to take part in that. Just to mention that the social media, women can participate in either just the interviews alone, just the social media group alone, or can take part in both if they wish. Okay. The reason for doing both of those things is that I hoped that the social media group might pick up some different data than speaking to the women on a face-to-face, one-to-one basis. I don't know if it's going to work, which again is quite scary because it's not been tried before, and certainly not for this particular subject. So I'm just going to skip past that because I've talked a little bit about narrative research. In terms of how I'm going to analyse my data, I'm going to go through this very quickly. I'm going to be using this particular model. This is Susan Chase's model for narrative analysis, and it uses what's called 5 lenses approach. So there are 5 different ways to look at the data you have, and that can apply to data that's verbal data, recorded data, photographic data, whatever type of data it is that you have. I've already used this to look at my ethics narrative and my ethics journey. So this is the method that I will be using. In terms of the importance of reflection, I've already mentioned my reflective diary, which is a big black book that I carry everywhere with me and contains writing, drawing, sketches, diagrams of what's happening in terms of me, in terms of my PhD, in terms of what I'm doing at the moment, in terms of my supervisory meetings. It has everything in it. And that's a really important part of the way I reflect on, am I doing the right things? Am I going the right way? What feedback am I looking at, and what do I need to do next? And it's been useful to draw on those reflective skills that you gain as a midwife in your clinical practice as well. So in terms of current timeline, so I've only just commenced recruitment, and one of the reasons for that is it took me 18 months to get ethical approval for this project. It was a very long and difficult and painful process. As you can probably tell, I'm still waiting for one letter of access. I don't know whether it was the subject matter or the way that I'm doing this, but it certainly took a long time to get, and I had to get NHS ethical approval. So I've gone through the HRA system and the IRAS system to get approval for this study, and then go to the trusts for the local approval. So that process in itself has taken an incredibly long time. Promoting the study has also taken a lot of work. It's multiple. It's a study that's been done across 4 sites, including ambulance service. So it's been multiple visits to lots of sites, getting the information out there, meeting up with the managers, meeting up with the midwives, getting the information out there, producing the posters, promoting the study in-house in lots and lots of different ways. So that's taken quite a long time as well. And again, it isn't just midwives. Students can help to participate and can help to recruit women as well. So it's quite all-encompassing. I'm just waiting for my first participant at the moment. So just to finish then, because I'm sure I must be nearly at the end of my time limit, in terms of the approach, for me, the beauty of using a narrative approach is that it does allow you to be flexible. It does allow you to make changes in the research process as you go along. And I also think it will help me to get the best out of the narrative data. Because really the core of this, like I said, is the woman's voice, it's the woman's story, it's her perspective, her view, it's her experience, it's how she feels, how she felt, what she wants to tell me and what she doesn't want to tell me about what happened to her. And we know midwifery is a profession that uses stories a lot. Women share narratives, we share narratives with each other as midwives. And certainly for me, it's for women to be able to tell us their stories and for us to listen to this phenomenon, which is very, very poorly understood. And I'll finish there.
Thank you very much.